As a reformed hacker turned career engineer in corporate IT, it's important sometimes to provide backstory. And if you stick around to the end of this one, there's something in it for a few of you. Because honestly, nobody cares about my dead friend. Man, where do I start with this one? Today, let's talk about Blair Matthew Cummings, or Dead Blair if you've ever heard me talk about him in real life. Let's start with this picture of Blair and his dad, probably 2005 or so. I feel comfortable about two things. First, he'd call me an asshole for calling him Dead Blair. Then we'd laugh for about 2 hours about the whole thing. I'll throw in a disclaimer here as well. Many of the things I'm going to talk about today simply no longer exist. I'll do my best to explain them as I go along. I'm not sure how far into my retail software career it was when he and I first met. By the way, a retail computer software store is where people would purchase computer software and other accessories. They don't really exist much anymore. Kind of like really small Best Buy focused only on software and not computers or music or phones or appliances or shit like that. I do remember our friendship was very fast. And one of the first times we hung out, we realized we'd actually crossed paths before. Blair ran a computer bulletin board, or BBS, in my area. At the same time, I was busy breaking copy protection schemes and uploading the fruits of my efforts to as many places as I could, including Blair's bulletin board. And I know this because he's the asshole who booted me. Again, I say these words in love. Alright, this one might take a second. When people had landline phones in their homes, you could connect your computer to a device called a modem. A bulletin board, or BBS, was simply another computer in someone else's house that people would use to do things like trade illegally copied software. Trading illegally copied software is still a thing, but I don't have the time to explain modern copy protection today. To take any conversation with Blair out of context, you would think we'd hated one another. On the contrary, there was genuine mutual affection there. I love that dude, and I still do to this very day. He was the half of my nerd personality I couldn't get other people to understand. He was the mouthy one, and I was the diplomat. He was the salesman, and I was the engineer. He was my hype man and my annoying kid brother all in one. Going back to the BBS story, once we put together who I was, and more specifically, why Blair had booted me, we actually laughed about it a lot. He said something like, so you're the fucker trying to get me in trouble. And I'd remind him I was the one breaking the law. He was just an accessory after the fact. I mean, that's, how we would kind of bust each other's balls. Quick disclaimer. The statutes of limitations for any cyber crimes I may have knowledge of have all run out. We called one another asshole with all the affection in the world. We loved the Blues Brothers, punk rock, and computers. Blair would run his mouth and I'd bail us out. But if anyone ever said anything against me, he was ready for them when I wasn't. I'm not talking about anything physical. I mean, shit, aside from Blair getting punched in the face walking out of the 930 Club once, I can't remember actually any physical violence. And the bouncer at the 930 Club saw that one punch and intervened before it became anything. I tell this story from time to time. Blair and I were hanging out one night talking about our mutual interest in computer security and what was and was not secure. And he made a comment along the lines that I can't do something. And I just looked at him, very quietly said to him, "Don't tell me can't, motherfucker." And he knew I meant what I said. But because he also loved to just fuck with me all the time, he said, "Oh, come on, I'll bet you can't." And it was pretty much on from there. The challenge was that I could not hack into his bulletin board system. For starters, he pulled the account that I had been using to upload software. I think I was using Muffin Man as a handle a lot back then. I still have no idea why, by the way. Blair was on to part of my game, but, I knew people. I'd had a properly vetted account on Blair's board for quite a while. He was aware of me. Yes, sometimes BBS ops insisted on kind of getting to know you before they'd allow you on their board. I keep wanting to say more modern terms like calling a BBS their site, kind of like a web address. I mean, maybe it's close, but only in a really, really small microcosmic way. Like, you had to jump through a whole lot of these elaborate hoops basically to just look at someone's single web page. I'm not going to do a deep dive on what BBSs used to be like today, but the metaphor is close enough. If there wasn't a link to something on a site, you simply didn't get it. Most sites had stuff like role-playing games and a few different chat forums, which is kind of how Blair sniffed me out in the first place. I didn't do anything stupid like go onto a forum and post wares with a Z to see if anyone had stuff to trade. Come on, man, I'm too elegant for stuff like that. No, I got caught uploading multi-part zip files in MIME format that contained software that I'd hacked. Blair was savvy enough to see that my uploads were kind of big and weird looking, and he told me he booted me not because I was pirating software or even uploading pornography, which was also uploaded in that similar fashion. His concern was that he thought there might be viruses in these multi-part MIME encoded snippets that would somehow infect his computer. And try as I might at the time, he simply would not budge. And he was going to be right in spite of his being wrong about all of it. I need to take a bit of a pit stop here. I think about the phrase on the shoulders of giants a lot. And I think about how the stack, the stuff that makes everything that we do today possible, has grown at such a cataclysmic rate. In the span of my IT career, I've gone from dipshit hacks like the one I'm about to expose to recording this podcast on so many layers my 1988 brain wouldn't have been able to comprehend it all. The device I'm using right now has a terabyte of storage, and honestly, I'm not sure how the memory is used by all the technology going on right now. Things are sandboxed. Different parts of the stack might have their own RAM, things like the camera on an iPad. No idea how things like the operating system or the browser impact this figure, beyond the storage breakdown I get. Mobile architectures make up for a lot of the sins of their forebears. Things like application RAM really don't hold that much meaning anymore. I mean, when is the last time you saw an out-of-memory message about anything, let alone on your phone? Storage? Yeah. I mean, my phone literally just messaged me about an app using storage for greater than 6 months. But memory? That used to be a hard limit. Which brings us back to Blair. See, Blair knew, he was convinced, there was no way I'd ever get back on his board, let alone find a way to hack into it. And if I did pull that off, it was cool because he was very sure he was going to catch me again. So a few weeks go by, and we really didn't talk much about the BBS thing anymore. Blair had gotten a cell phone, and he'd been on my case to get one myself, and I'd finally given in. He was complaining about getting these stupid messages on his phone, and I explained to him it was probably me. See, back then, texting, even the stuff where you had to do numbers instead of letters, even that hadn't gone mainstream yet. It was kind of buried in the menus of old phones, way down in the system and diagnostic menus. I found it and was sending him messages in the hopes he would flip out a lot more than he did. I was sending him shit like balance past due and illegal activity in all caps, hoping, praying he'd get some kind of alert on his end. He said no, it was just some kind of weird noise he'd never heard the phone make and this stupid icon beside the time on his phone. So as I'm walking him through his phone menus to show him all the phone messages, convinced he's going to laugh his ass off at my shenanigans and my clear dominance in all matters technical, he kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, is this like the time you were going to hack into my BBS?" And right then I knew the hook was set. See, I'd already busted him up. Enough for the purposes of this conversation anyways. He just had no idea whatsoever. I went home and he and I were both on different bulletin board chatting with someone and talking shit about him on our phones behind the back when I casually mentioned to him I'd already hacked his board and I could let him know if he was willing to listen. At first he laughed, but he knew I wasn't joking. There was this bit of a pause, followed by him saying, "What did you do, motherfucker?" I assured him everything was cool. He just needed to go into admin mode, drop to a shell, look for a file on his C drive named hello.txt. Don't worry, I made it easy to find. It's in the root folder. Go ahead, I'll wait. And from the other end of the phone, I hear him say, "Fuck. How did you do that, you dick?" Again, said in love. And my reply to him simply was, "Don't ever, ever tell me can't, motherfucker." From that point on, anytime anyone ever pushed on me like that, from a place that wasn't out of love or respect, or they were mean-spirited or anything negative, Blair would look at them and say, "Don't push it, man. If he says it, it's probably true. Trust me." No one had ever stood up for me like that publicly. His confidence was my confidence. I mean, to a point. And yeah, okay, it was over some kind of questionable shit. Okay, fine. But he knew it further cemented our friendship. In fact, the phrase, "Don't tell me can't, motherfucker," was like our thing for a really long time. I'd love to have Blair here to tell you this himself, but on September 10th, 2007, Blair Matthew Cummings died in his sleep. He was 37 years old. That's not the hardest part of this for me anymore. You see, I didn't find out Blair died until about a year later. "Oh, what's the matter, you sobby bitch? You're such good friends, you let a year go by for checking in on him?" Well, actually, yeah. We didn't constantly need to check in with one another. The last time we spoke, he was confirming there was no way in hell he was going to miss my upcoming wedding, which, inevitably, he flaked on, because that's the kind of shit he did. He promised to do stuff, then he'd flake, and I'd forgive him. Because we got each other, I figured I hadn't heard from him because he had shit going on in his life. But when his email bounced, I knew something was up. Blair loved the domain he'd been able to secure, and he had this idea for a business plan, Mobile Digital Broadcasting, or MDB.net. He got a 3-letter domain name, which was very highly coveted back in the day, and he tied this loose business model to it. It was basically the same idea behind that company Mark Cuban sold to Yahoo for like $5 billion. Blair's idea wasn't as lofty as that, but vacating that domain name was not a good sign. Then I Googled his name, and I found the tribute one of his brothers had put up for him. And I cried. A lot. I miss you, you jerky little freak. Oh, before I forget, here's what I did. So I talked about the stack earlier. Well, there really wasn't a stack for Blair's BBS. It was a single application that ran on MS-DOS, which meant the only stack there was that application itself. His BBS operated one layer from the hardware, and that one layer was the operating system. He hosted news and chat boards like I mentioned, but he also had a few games. These games ran in a couple of different ways. Either they were modules specifically written to interface with the host BBS, or more commonly, they were just regular old DOS programs your BBS shelled out to run. Look, back then, no one understood things like sandboxing and not running everything as root and running everything under the same user context. So if your BBS shelled out to a game that had issues and one knew how to exploit those issues, getting that game to crash and expose the underlying operating system was only slightly challenging. And since a BBS was basically just the console being sent back across the modem connection to a terminal emulation program, whatever I saw was visible on his end as well. That unnerved me a bit, especially in the first couple of days, when I envisioned he was just sitting in a dark room, smoking a stupid fucking cigarette, staring at his screen, waiting for me to pounce. I knew him better, though. He was actually playing the very game I had planned to use to bust him up with another guy that dialed into his board. Basically, my goal was to get that app, which ran on a standard MS-DOS PC, to crash. It was a DOS console text game whose output was reflected back to the remote user the same as if they were running it locally. The BBS Blair used could manage 2 of these connections at a time, but it was all run under a single MS-DOS application, which is really all I needed to know. See, the stack back then was a lot simpler. Interestingly, the smaller the stack is, the worse the damage that can be incurred. There was only a single application running at a time. The operating system really did little more than blink the cursor, waiting for the next user command. The individual application programs themselves did all the work, like manage MS-DOS sessions for 2 different games whose output it was directing back to modems. A quick calculation meant that I had some amount of 640,000 characters, or 640K, in memory on Blair's computer. Some of that was needed by the board itself. Some of that was needed by each of the sessions running on the board. And somehow I needed to find a way to cause my portion of that stack to become unstable and crash. So I found a way to throw so much input at the input buffers over my modem connection that for this game that it simply just stopped responding. It was pretty common app behavior back then. The only feedback I got on my end was a blank screen with a non-blinking cursor. I quickly dialed into Blair's BBS from my cell phone to make sure that the other node answered, and it did. I fumbled around for a second, and I speculated I might actually be at the equivalent of a DOS prompt, and I just wasn't able to realize it. So I typed in dir, and it didn't work, and thought to myself, well, shit, what am I going to do? So I sent a bunch of Control-C commands, and nothing. Control-C was the universal computer application for please stop now back then. Nothing, though. I felt like if I dropped, Blair would figure out something had happened. So I tried sending some other ANSI control characters across, and I was warmly greeted with a C prompt, complete with the flashing cursor. When I typed dir and I saw the contents of the folder on his computer where this game was installed, I knew I was good. I only needed to make a small point that day, so I'm pretty sure I just echoed, "Don't tell me can't, motherfucker," into a file cleverly named hello.txt or something equally cryptic, then confirmed the file was actually written to. Then I had to think about how I was going to get out of this mess. Sure, I could always do the inelegant thing and reboot his machine. I kind of was still in my own head and figured he'd catch something like that. So I just tried typing the word exit. I mean, worst case, everything would simply hang, or I could use his other node to restart his box or something like that. And wouldn't you know, exit did the trick. It was literally just like quitting the game. I was right back on his board, where I promptly signed out and waited to hear from Blair. He never had any idea until I told him. And then I took the moment to explain how computer viruses work and why allowing my uploads only made him accessory after the fact. I figure more and more Blair stories are going to surface the more of these episodes I do. Thanks for taking a moment to kind of listen to part of the origin story there. I wish Blair was still around to see where things are now. He'd be the loudest one in the comments giving me shit about not being able to handle my face, and I'd take every word of his criticism too. Okay, let's talk about this content. I've done a ton of exploration, finding things out there that bring me real, honest joy. Yeah, we get it, you're grateful. Let me talk about how grateful I am. I'm starting a small line of merch. I'm starting with a couple of things very near and dear to me: t-shirts and stickers. I'm an aficionado of both. Now, I didn't start out as an aficionado of stickers. In fact, one may look at my perspective back then as being somewhat curmudgeonly, even. I'll get into it one day, but there was a time where I wanted to walk away from this whole engineering thing. This was just about the time of the advent of major scale cloud adoption as well. Okay, so if you've stuck around this long, be one of the first 10 people to put the words sizzle chest in my comments, and I'll hook you up with some merch when it comes together. I assure you, Blair will laugh his ass off when he hears about this. Jerky little fucker. Take care.